This is KSL Sunday Edition with Boyd Matheson.
Welcome to Sunday Edition. I am Boyd Matheson. You know, each Sunday we attempt to divide the rage from the reason, elevate the conversation, connect the dots, and make the news make sense. We have conversations with great thinkers, great leaders, and great people making a difference. We talk politics so we can discuss social commentary. We explore society so we can discuss principles and the people in America who live them. We bring the best and brightest to Utah, and we send the Utah model to our nation's capital and beyond. Arthur Brooks is an American social scientist, a William Henry Bloomberg Professor of the Practice of Public Leadership at the Harvard Kennedy School. He's a strategic thinker, powerful writer, and author of numerous best-selling books, including his latest work, Build the Life You Want, which he happened to co-author with someone named Oprah Winfrey. Arthur, welcome to Sunday Edition.
Good morning, Boyd. Lovely to talk to you. And I love the introduction on what you're trying to do with the show. And the reason I love coming to Utah and spend so much time there is the fact that you're trying to divide rage from reason. And even more than that, when the country is hating its enemies and the enemies within more than any other, you're in the business of loving your enemies. And that's really what gives the most reason of all. So thank you for that. And thank you to all your neighbors for that, too.
It is. It's the Utah model. We always say answers won't come from the halls of Congress. They'll come from places like little grassy bowls in my neighborhood where our community tends to gather. You've been on a big project of late with Oprah Winfrey, new book. Give us kind of the backstory. How did that all come about?
Well, I've been working on the science of happiness for a long time. I'm a social scientist, and off and on in my academic career, I've written a lot about the science of happiness. Well, it's really been my full-time job since I came to Harvard about 5 years ago. And I read a column in The Atlantic every Thursday morning about the science of happiness written for lay people, and I teach a big class on it called Leadership and Happiness at the Harvard Business School. Well, Oprah Winfrey, turns out, was a reader of my column, a book that I wrote in 2022 about how to get happier as you get older. Crossed her desk, she read it, and she gave me a call. She said, "This is Oprah Winfrey." And I said, "Well, yeah, right. And this is Batman." I mean, who would believe it? But sure enough, and she was pretty interested in a way that we could maybe team up. She has access to the minds and hearts of a lot of people who need this kind of information. And we decided to team up on a new project to spread these ideas of the science of happiness popularly with millions of Americans. And that's our goal, is to make a happier country through information and ideas and sharing.
I love that. And I always love your approach, Arthur, as you look at things. This is not about glasses that are half full, half empty, or even rose-colored. There's a lot of science behind all of this. And so let's start where you start in the book, and that is really looking and framing things of what do we get wrong when we think about happiness and building a better life?
There's so much that we get wrong. To begin with, we take happiness and think of that as the ultimate goal, as if somehow on this side of heaven we could be ultimately happy. That's not only impossible, it's foolish and unhealthy and even dangerous. We have negative emotions that were given to us so that we could understand the outside world, so that we could be averse to the dangers around us. If we didn't have fear and anger and disgust and sadness, we'd be dead in a week. We need negative emotions. They're part of what a full life is. And as we all know, getting on in years, or even young people know as well, you need negative experiences so that you can learn and grow as a person, to be fully alive as a person. And so the first big mistake that people make is saying, I want to be happier. No, the goal should be to be happier than you were. Happiness is not a destination. Happiness is a direction. Now, that leads to the second big mistake that people make, which is that they think that to get happier, they need to just feel better, that negative emotions are bad and positive emotions are good, and get rid of the negative emotions. And that's completely wrong for the same reasons I just talked about. Happiness isn't even a feeling. Feelings are evidence of happiness. And that's what we try to talk about in the book, and I do in my teaching and writing, is to define it in a really scientific way so that we can understand it and pursue it, practice it, and even share it with others.
And that's such an important part of it. We always say focus precedes success in anything you're doing. And when it comes to happiness, building that life, you have to do the same. One of the areas that seems to be a struggle around the world, and especially in our country, is the institution of family. You go into this specifically in the book, that families are messy, and that's a good thing. And there's a way to lean in and create happiness within the family first, and then into the neighborhood and community.
Yeah, that's true. And, you know, family relationships are the most mystical kind of love. Why? Because these are the most intense love relationships that we have, and we didn't choose them. It's an extraordinary thing. They were chosen for us. We didn't choose them. God knows we wouldn't choose them in so many cases. But the truth of the matter is that we have these intense relationships that we're wired with. Now, we understand the neurophysiology of these family links. It's something called oxytocin, aka the love molecule, produced in our brains when we have children and brothers and sisters, and we see our parents, and we know how that works. But that is actually, as far as I'm concerned, evidence of the miracle. It's just a wonderful thing. The trouble is that we've been told, and too often in our culture and society, we're encouraged to create schism in these bonds, in these relationships. 11% of parents with adult children are not on speaking terms with at least one of their children. I mean, it's terrible. 1 in 6 Americans is not talking to a family member today because of politics. I mean, Boyd, this is insane. This is a self-inflicted wound. To the extent that we're paying attention, we should remember that when you hate somebody in your family, not speaking to somebody in your family, somebody's profiting. And it's not you. It's the politician who says, don't talk to your liberal aunt. It's the media talking head who's saying that your conservative uncle is somebody beneath contempt. Remember, these are your flesh and blood. These are people given to you mystically. Don't let these relationships fall away.
So important. I want to just real quickly before we go to break, you have spoken a lot about this idea of contempt being the real problem. It's not just the political polarization, the contempt issue. Just explain that for us, because I think it connects to the happiness quotient in a big way.
Yeah, so we have basic emotions, positive and negative. There are 4 basic negative emotions that are produced by the limbic system so that you can defend yourself in the face of threats. They're disgust, anger, sadness, and fear. When you take 2 of them and mix them together, namely anger and disgust, you get contempt, which is an ice-cold emotion that says you are worthless. You are beneath my consideration. And that's how we talk to each other. It's a habit in our political system today. That's how our political leaders, they get on TV to say that the other side is stupid and evil because they have these different opinions, and that we should actually hold them as completely worthless. This is what leads to divorce, by the way. There's a lot of research that shows that you can be as angry as you want with your spouse. It won't lead to divorce. What leads to divorce is considering them to be worthless in what they say and do. It's the ultimate expression of hatred. America is like a couple on the rocks that needs counseling, really, is what it comes down to, because contempt is our problem.
I think that's so vital, and I want to stick in one last thing, because just while we're on this topic, the other extreme of that we're often seeing is this idea of indifference, especially as we look those around us, those who are different than we are, think different, live different, act different, believe different. And so we either go to that contempt space that you just described, but sometimes we end up with complete indifference and disconnection.
Yeah, no, for the longest time, what we've tried to do in American society is that we are with our kin, our families, for example, or with the people with whom we share religious beliefs very intensively in our communities and our churches, for example. But then the bulk of the rest of our time, we mix apostolically with the rest of the population. We make bridges with people who are very different than we are. This is critical to the American experience. But increasingly, with the advent of social media and the mobility of the American population, and with the malevolent coaching of so many leaders in politics and media, we're separating ourselves permanently from them, from those people. We have to remember that what we're talking about, loving our neighbors and loving our enemies, most of us, many of us on Sunday mornings, we have to have an opportunity to do that. And to do that, we need to get out of our houses. We need to go where people are not expecting us and say things that they're not expecting to hear, expressions of love across our differences. This is our duty as human beings, as Americans, as humans, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we're going to stay with the conversation and the question about happiness, and we're going to look at how it applies not only in our personal lives, but to community, to businesses, and yes, even government. More with Arthur Brooke when Sunday Edition continues on KSL 5 TV. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Sunday Edition. We're continuing our conversation with Arthur Brooks, former head of the American Enterprise Institute, professor of the practice of public leadership at Harvard, and author with Oprah Winfrey of a new book called Build the Life You Want. Arthur, you've clearly been building the life you want in an amazing way. I want to get into your backstory a little bit, because going from a traveling French horn player in Europe to one of the elite economists and economics professors to the head of a powerful think tank, and now as a professor teaching the practice of leadership and the art of happiness, just take us a little bit on that journey for a minute.
One of the reasons I love the United States is because there are so many ways that you can build a life like a pioneer. I'm sort of a professional handcart pioneer, you might say, just kind of roaming from place to place, looking for ways that I can do what I think God wants me to do in my life. I started off as a classical musician. I moved to Barcelona chasing a girl, hoping I could convince her to marry me. It took me a couple of years to close that deal, but I did. Now we're 32 years in with children, and I'm a grandfather. But then the professional journey took me in a different direction. I went to college in my late 20s, got my bachelor's degree and master's, and then went on, got a PhD, became a social scientist, and did that for studying happiness and art and beauty and philanthropy for about 10 years, and then ran a think tank for 10 years, the American Enterprise institution dedicated to opportunity, to the free enterprise system to lift people out of poverty. And last but not least, I retired from that in my mid-50s, and I came to Harvard to dedicate the rest of my life to writing, speaking, and teaching about how to lift people up and bring them together in bonds of happiness and love. And I have to say, I thank God every day giving me the opportunity to work what I think is an apostolate of happiness and love, to lift other people up, whether they share my religion or my politics or not. I think I can do that, and that's what I want to do with the rest of my life.
It's such an important part of your work. Your last two books really have focused on that idea of meaningful work. Help us kind of sort that through a little bit. As we look at our work, sometimes it's that day-to-day grind. Sometimes we're just trying to get to the weekend or to retirement. How do we make sure we're actually finding the meaning in all the time we spend in our work?
It's an interesting thing. My throughout my adult life, I always, part of the teachings of my religion, I'm a Catholic. Every time I come to Utah, they say that I'm, my LDS sisters and brothers say I'm their favorite Catholic. But I know you say that to all your Catholic friends. So, but anyway, I've always learned this teaching from the Catholic Church that we should sanctify our work. We should be saints in our work. And I know is a concept that's really important to the Latter-day Saints too, that we should be saints in all that we do, and our work is a kind of prayer. What does that mean? Well, it took me until I was a little bit older to do the research on what that means as a social scientist, to look at the data and the science behind that. And what it really means, I believe, is this. What will give you joy in your work and create value with your life and in the lives of other people has nothing to do with your job title or your functional responsibilities or your pay or your prestige. It really only has to do with two things. Number one is to earn your success, to feel like you're accomplishing something and rewarded and being acknowledged for that accomplishment, for your hard work and personal responsibility. Incredibly important. The second is that you're serving other people and you know who they are, that you believe that somebody actually needs you, that the basis of dignity is to be needed. The biggest problem in our society, including the way that we treat our sisters and brothers in poverty, is we treat them like liabilities to manage, as opposed to assets to develop where they can be needed, just as we treat our children as assets to develop that are needed individuals. My work should serve other people, and it will give me joy and fulfillment to the extent that I can see the people in their faces, and I know that they need me in what I'm doing, and everybody should seek that out in their work, and we should work to have a society where everybody can have work that accomplishes that.
That's so important, and I think the application of that is such a challenge. We get so distracted with so many of the other things. We complain about the colleague or the boss or what's going on in the community, as opposed to really leaning in and getting it done. One of the things I wanted to get to, Arthur, is how do we apply these things, whether it's inside a business organization, a nonprofit, in our community, and especially in government? It seems to me that what you are talking about is if we can get right from the inside out, then we can actually start to become more of that peacemaker. Sometimes I think we're in the peacekeeping business, just trying to avoid conflict or do the tough stuff. But it seems to me what you're telling us is that if we do it from the inside out individually, that the natural byproduct will be more peace.
Yeah, one of the most important moral and philosophical as well as psychological teachings is that everybody wants love. We all want to be loved. And when people are lonely, they lack love, for example. When people are angry, when they're feeling highly aversive, stressful emotions, what they really want is love. The problem is that we go about getting love in the wrong way. By seeking love or demanding love, it's usually a counterproductive strategy. The way to get love is to give it. That's the strategy. Now it's counterintuitive in a lot of ways. Our brain chemistry doesn't lead us to that, but understanding that is the divine path of life, whether you're religious or not, that is a truth about how to live. And that helps us understand what we need to do as leaders as well. The class that I teach at the Harvard Business School is called Leadership and Happiness. And the leadership part is critically important. What I'm trying to do, and by the way, I have a lab at the Harvard Kennedy School called the Leadership and Happiness Lab. It's not dedicated to pouring stuff into test tubes. There's a lot of that going on at Harvard. My lab is dedicating to learning how to become a happiness teacher. What's the best way to train happiness teachers, not just at universities. I'm involved in a lot of universities, including the University of Utah these days, which is a wonderful institution. I'm an impact scholar there for the next couple of years. I'm actually most interested in training leaders to be happiness teachers in business, as bosses, in families, in communities, in churches, so that people will say, I understand the science of happiness, the habits that lead to it, and in a spirit of love, I'm going to teach other people to do it. And here's the secret, Boyd. Here's the dirty secret behind that. Maybe it's the clean secret behind that, is when you become a happiness teacher, you become the happy person. That's the secret to all of us, to lift other people up, and in so doing, to lift ourselves up.
So important. And Arthur, just in our last 30 seconds here, give us the one thing. I'm always curious. You were one of the great gifts that I received being back in Washington, D.C., making that connection, learning from you in so many different places and spaces. Give us the one thing that you wish we were talking about more in this country that may be just a little under the radar.
Yeah, no, it's something that's always ever present in our minds and in our hearts, but it's not in the vernacular of what politics really is. There's a short-term way to get political power, and that's to work the levers of fear in people's lives. When you listen to politicians today, they're talking the language of fear, that our country is in decline, that the people want to hurt you, that the other party is the biggest threat to American society. That's all the language of fear. Well, every country or company or family or church can run on the polarity of fear, and many do, or the polarity of love. These are opposite poles. We learn in most of the great theological traditions and philosophical traditions, but in neuroscience as well, that fear and love are opposites. And so you can move the polarity from fear to love by changing the vernacular, to start talking about how we need to love each other and to love our enemies. And in so doing, that our best days can lie ahead. And that's what we need to be doing more of. And all of us are responsible for that, by turning off the fear and turning on the love in the way that we talk about our country and our lives to each other, in our churches and our communities, companies, and what we're demanding from our politicians.
Fantastic. As always, I learned something new today from Arthur Brooks. The book, again, is called Build the Life You Want, with Arthur Brooks and Oprah Winfrey. Arthur, thanks so much for joining us today on Sunday Edition. You're a great thinker, you're an extraordinary influencer, and you're one of those difference makers that we look to help us march the country forward. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Boyd. One more thing I want to actually mention, that those of our viewers who are in Park City can come see me. I noticed that I have an event at the Eccles Theater in Park City on the 8th of November. So come hear us talk about the love and happiness and be part of the conversation. Fantastic.
Stay with us. We'll close out the show with a historic look at a deeper, more thoughtful, and more inspiring interpretation of the famous Declaration of Independence phrase, the pursuit of happiness, when Sunday Edition continues. Well, we're staying with the happiness theme as we round out the program today. Often when justifying our own selfish or self-indulgent behavior, many Americans readily recite the Declaration of Independence's most famous passage regarding our right to pursue happiness. Few of us recognize the true meaning or intent of the pursuit of happiness phrase Thomas Jefferson so carefully and purposefully placed into the heart and soul of the Declaration of Independence. Jefferson had learned from great thinkers and leaders like Aristotle, Cicero, and John Locke that the pursuit of happiness was not a casual phrase or even a simple right. They all viewed this pursuit as the highest calling men and women could seek. Happiness is the aim of life, Jefferson stated, but virtue is the foundation of happiness. To Jefferson, the meaning of the pursuit of happiness phrase went so much deeper than just fleeting emotional feelings or personal pleasure. Dr. Darren McMahon, in his book, Happiness, A History, tied together the way Jefferson and other early Americans approached and pursued happiness, connecting the dots from these great leaders and their personal beliefs and public statements. He concluded that their vision of the pursuit of happiness could only be achieved through virtue, discipline, and service. Think about that. Virtue, discipline, and service, hardly the words which spring to mind when you think about how pursuing happiness is portrayed in the media or online. To the founders of this nation, virtue was not just about morality or chastity, but it also included a deep commitment to living up to the highest standards of integrity, humility, and loftier pursuits. Discipline was simply the price of admission to achieve success in America. Service created connection and gave greater meaning to life in the new land. As it relates to service, Dr. McMahon further noted, early Americans agreed that pursuing happiness of others actually helps you to ensure your own. I would add that while Americans are often portrayed as self-absorbed narcissists, it's also fair to say that Americans are among the most compassionate and serving and giving people on the planet. Regularly the first to give, the first to arrive on scene of a natural disaster, the first to raise awareness of a tragedy or an injustice. I'm convinced that many Americans have experienced for themselves that the happiness that comes from helping others is every bit as exciting as any virtual reality game and far more satisfying than a shopping spree. John Stuart Mill observed, happiness is not the same thing as contentment, but involves the pursuit of nobler feelings, higher pleasures, and higher things, which I would suggest include things like virtue, discipline, and service. Thomas Jefferson knew exactly what he was doing and what he was saying when he set the standard by declaring that everyone had that unalienable right of opportunity and even the obligation to pursue happiness in this great land of America. It's time for every American to benefit from and be committed to a more focused and passionate pursuit of happiness. That's something to think about today. Now, we should all go out, as our guest Arthur Brooks and his co-author Oprah Winfrey suggest in Build a Better Life. And as Thomas Jefferson declared, we should enjoy the sunshine on the peaks and mountaintops of our own pursuit of happiness. Thanks for watching Sunday Edition. I'm Boyd Matheson. We appreciate you joining us. And as always, as you go out into the world today, make sure you see something that inspires, say something that uplifts, and do something that makes a difference. Music and the spoken word is next.